I went to Vietnam in May of 1969, and I spent 1 year with the 1st Air Cav in Company D, 7th Battalion, and I spent most of my year in the jungle, minus a little bit of hospital time. I carried an M60 machine gun which weighed 40 pounds with a 50-round feeder belt. I carried 300 rounds of ammunition, which weighed another 30 pounds. So there was 70 pounds before I started on food and water for 3 days. It was the age of the draft, and we had kids there that couldn't read or write. We had kids there with master's degrees. They were all drafted. And in my lifetime, which is getting on up there, I never seen men get along like I did in that jungle. They'd lay down and die for each other in a hurry. And it didn't matter what your color was. It didn't matter where you come from. Of course, I was a draftee. I went to Vietnam as a private E2, and in less than 6 months, I was a staff sergeant. I was a buck sergeant for 2 weeks. I promoted that. We lost that many people that fast. At one time, I was an E4 platoon leader, and I was promoted to a staff sergeant in the jungle. And then the deputy commanding general of the 1st Cav flew out to the LZ and offered me a direct commission in the jungle. And I turned that down because I just knew I was going to go to school on a GI Bill when I returned from Vietnam. And my company commander said that was all he could do for me. He said, what is it, Tony? You want to be chief of staff or you want to be a damn civilian? A lot of it was really ugly. Ugly in a way that they didn't last long. And there's one in particular, a young soldier named Harry Underwood. He was in my platoon, and he'd been walking point for about 2 or 3 months, and I found out that he had enlisted in the Army to go to automobile mechanics. So I go to my first sergeant, I said, this Underwood kid had enlisted. He was RA, not drafted like we were, to be automobile mechanics. And he said, well, we'll send him back to Saigon, put him in a motor pool. So I pulled him off point, let him carry my radio. And the very next day, we had stopped to take a break. He was standing right by my side when they shot him. And he was dead when he hit the ground. And the next day, he would have been out of the jungle. My worst day in Vietnam. Words can't tell it, pictures don't show it. The dirt, the being dirty for so long. At one point, I had a fungus grow up in my ear because I'd been dirty. That they had to medevac me because of it. Because it grew in my ear. I took Darvons and aspirins till my stomach couldn't take any more because my ear hurt so bad. And finally got me back to the hospital to dig it out of my ear. That's how dirty we were. Besides being shot at, the life was just in one word, just miserable. Filthy, dirty, wet, sweaty. Basically all of our movement was by helicopter. I have an air medal for doing 25 combat assaults out of a helicopter, which basically they would designate the area we were going into, and there would be anywhere from 6 to 8 helicopters on the LZ, and we would load them from each side, and they would drop us in. And the first load of soldiers that went in were usually, they considered it a hot LZ, and then the rest of them come in, we'd set security up and like that. They were a welcome sight a lot of times. If you were leaving, going back to LZ, if you were being medevaced, which I had several of those that put people on them when they're medevaced, bringing food and water and mail every 3 days. And so they were welcome sight to see. They were not chairs, you just climb, you sit on the board. A couple of times I sat on the pontoons, the skids. I just sat on those when we moved, and you could load about, like a combat troop is going to be, like, say, 150-pound man plus 80, 90 to 100 pounds of gear. So we about 8 was a combat load, I think, 6 or 8 on a Huey, and we'd load. When we loaded them, they would be in a row, and you would load from both sides. You'd set your men, sit around, so many get on a bird, and so many get on a bird, and they take off and they come back for the next load, because it would take several trips to get a whole company relocated in the jungle. And I was back on an LZ, and I've had about 2 or 3 weeks before I came home, and I spent basically all my time in the jungle. And I go to my first sergeant, and I said, I'm gonna go home shortly, and I haven't been to Saigon. So he takes me over there and gets a pilot and co-pilot and me. We get on at Toney, we get on a helicopter and we go to Saigon and spend the night and come back. So that was a good trip.